When the Rolls-Royce stopped in the middle of Oberlände traffic, the city didn't wait. Horns exploded like fireworks. "Move now!" voices shouted from every direction. The driver fumbled. The madam in the back seat leaned forward, confused. The engine had simply choked. Smoke, silence, then shame. It was the worst place to stall. Lagos, peak hour, chaos. She stepped out. Even the air changed. Her heels tapped on the asphalt like foreign currency. Dark sunglasses hid her frustration. Gold earrings glinted against her scarf. The road didn't care. Buses hissed. Okadas zoomed past. Drivers slowed to stare, but no one helped, until he walked up from under the flyover, barefoot, dusty, carrying a toolbox made from recycled iron and tied shut with twine. His shirt clung to his back from heat and sweat. His trousers hung loosely on his narrow frame. But his eyes, they were not the eyes of a madman. They were sharp, steady, and focused on the engine. He didn't ask for permission. He signaled the driver to open the bonnet. The driver hesitated. The woman nodded once. He dipped his hand into the mess of metal, heat, and leaking coolant. His movements were clean, confident, no second guessing. In 10 minutes, the hissing stopped. In 15, the engine coughed. In 20, it roared back to life. She watched silently. Not the car, the man. Not his hands, his face, focused, unbothered. Not distracted by her wealth, her perfume, or the curious onlookers who murmured, "Na mechanic be this?" He wiped his forehead with a torn napkin, nodded to the driver. Began to walk away. She brought out her wallet. He raised his hand. No need, she tried again. He shook his head and pointed to the roadside. That was when she saw the child. A boy, maybe 5, sitting near a gutter, playing with 2 plastic bottle covers, barefoot, smiling, waiting. The man walked to him, lifted the child gently, sat beside him, took a sachet of water from a black nylon bag, poured a little on his hand, gave the rest to the boy. They shared it without speaking. She watched from inside the car, motionless. The driver was ready to go. She said nothing. When the car pulled away, she looked through the mirror one last time. The man was now lying on his back under the shade of the flyover, his arm under his son's head like a pillow. Both of them asleep. The city moved around them, but they were still. That night, her bed felt too soft, the AC too cold, her mansion in Ikoyi too quiet. She couldn't forget the man's hands. She couldn't forget the boy's smile. She couldn't forget the refusal to take money. The next morning, before breakfast, she told her driver, "Take me to Oberlände. Same spot, same flyover, same man. This time, boiling water with an empty tomato can over a small fire made from torn cartons." She stepped out of the car without her glasses. The boy saw her first. He nudged his father. He turned. She didn't speak, just pointed at the car, then at him. He stood confused. She opened the back door and said, "Come." He carried his son on one side and the toolbox on the other. He entered. She didn't say where they were going. He didn't ask. 20 minutes later, they arrived at a large compound in Lekki. Shiny floors, glass walls, parked cars, a mechanical bay, 12 cars under repair, 2 engineers in uniform. She walked straight to the workshop manager and said, "Let him show you what he can do." No CV, no references, just her word. The man handed him a spanner and pointed to a Lexus that had refused to start for days. He opened the hood, asked for water, requested a battery jump, twisted a connection, cleaned a plug. 15 minutes later, the engine came alive. The staff clapped. She smiled. He looked lost. She handed him a uniform, a key, a paper with his name already typed, offer letter, full-time employment, housing provided, health benefits, and at the bottom, an enrollment form for the child, to start school the following Monday. He tried to speak. She walked away. Some angels don't need wings. Some rewards don't wait for heaven. Some stories begin the moment a Rolls-Royce breaks down, right in front of the one man who still remembers how to fix things, even after life has broken everything else. He stood in the middle of the workshop, wearing a clean navy blue overall, hands still rough but steady. The concrete beneath his feet was smooth, nothing like the cracked pavement under the flyover. The scent in the air was no longer gutter and smoke, but engine oil, polish, and efficiency. Around him, men in branded uniforms moved like clockwork, tightening, lifting, testing diagnostics with tablets. He was the only one without training from this place. Yet he was the only one whose hands didn't need a second try. They gave him a corner, one bay, one toolbox, and a chance. He brought his son with him every day. The boy sat on a plastic chair in the corner, quietly drawing on leftover invoices, with pencil stubs. He didn't cry, he didn't wonder. He simply watched his father and waited. It wasn't just a job. It was a rebirth. The first paycheck came 2 weeks later. He stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. He had forgotten what paper money felt like when it had his name on it. That night, he bought his son new sandals. Not flashy, just something that fit. The next morning, the receptionist handed him a letter. Inside was a voucher. 1-bedroom staff quarters, walking distance from the workshop, furnished. He didn't understand it. They said, company policy, but he knew. It was her. She hadn't returned since that day. No calls, no visits, no orders. But her shadow lingered everywhere. The manager respected him like family. The security guards greeted him with both hands. The other staff, initially cold, soon began, asking him for advice on difficult car issues. He was a mystery to them. Where did he learn his skill? Why did the boss bring him personally, and why did she trust him without papers? They speculated. He said nothing. He only worked. One day, a G-Wagon came in with a stubborn ignition fault. 3 mechanics had failed to solve it. He fixed it in 10 minutes. Word spread. Customers began asking for the quiet one with the son. He never smiled much. But when he handed a car key to a satisfied customer, there was always a certain peace in his eyes. A peace he hadn't tasted since the day he lost everything. But even as he rose, her name remained a mystery. He had asked the cleaner once. The man laughed and said, "She owns everything you see here, and more." That was the day he learned. She was not just some rich woman in a Rolls-Royce. She was the CEO of 10 auto centers across Nigeria, of a transport company that ran bulletproof, convoys for politicians, of an app that connected drivers to on-demand roadside help. And she was barely in her 30s. He sat down that night, staring at the wall of his new room, thinking of the day she walked across Lagos traffic like a stranger. She hadn't bragged, hadn't even said her name, just handed him a key that unlocked more than a door. He still hadn't thanked her, not properly. And yet, every week, something new came his way. The boy started school. Uniform ironed, lunch packed, fees paid directly. No stress. Then came the health card, then a savings account, everything in order, quietly done. He had given her 10 minutes of free labor. She had given him back his entire life. Still, she remained distant. Until one morning, a call came to the workshop. A customer with a personal vehicle breakdown, urgent. High profile. The manager handed him the file. He checked the location. It was her house. His hands paused. Not fear, not excitement, just the weight of what it meant. When he arrived, the gate opened automatically. The compound was large, quiet, landscaped, with flowers that looked like they had personal stylists. He parked beside a Range Rover and stepped out. She was already waiting by the side of her Lexus, dressed in a plain t-shirt and slippers. No makeup, no staff in sight. He greeted her silently. She nodded. He opened the bonnet. It was a minor fault, air. Filter dislodged. 10 minutes again. She stood there watching, but this time, something in her eyes was different. Softer. He closed the hood. Wiped his hand. She looked at him. No words passed, only an understanding. He didn't ask why. She didn't explain. She just turned, walked back into her house and left him with the car, key in his hand. That evening, when he returned to the staff quarters, he found a small parcel waiting at his door. Inside, a brand-new toolbox, top grade, imported, engraved with his name, no card attached. But he knew she was still giving, even in silence. The rain came like a curse from heaven, unannounced, unforgiving. In 20 minutes, gutters overflowed, buses stalled, and Ikoyi's well-paved roads turned into rivers with no mercy. Most stayed indoors, behind glass and wealth. But not everyone had that kind of shield. At the workshop, the power cut first. Then the ceiling began to leak. The compound flooded waist-deep, swallowing tools, tires, and dignity. Staff panicked, dragging car batteries onto tables. Mechanics clutched phones wrapped in nylon. His son was at school, and the road to the school was already blocked. He didn't wait. He dropped the spanner mid-job and ran barefoot through the rising water. 20 minutes later, soaked, coughing and panting, he arrived at the school gate. Children had already been evacuated. He searched through the crowd, scanning every child in uniform. Then he saw him, perched on a teacher's back, clutching a damp lunch bag. The boy spotted him too, and smiled, as if nothing had changed. But something had. By the time they reached the workshop, most of the compound was ruined. One of the company's new delivery vans had floated into the fence. No one blamed him for leaving mid-task. No one even noticed. The manager called for a meeting. Staff were to go home until the place could be cleaned and assessed. Pay would be on hold. Damage reports were being written. He didn't argue. He only walked home slowly, holding his son's hand, wondering if the roof over their heads would survive the next rainfall. That night, he received a message. No name, just an address, and one line. Come tomorrow. It was her. Again. He arrived at the address the next morning, under the weight of a borrowed umbrella and quiet curiosity. It wasn't her house. It was a different building, a tall one, commercial, tinted glass. A receptionist in uniform waited at the door. She took him up in a private elevator. The 7th floor opened into a wide space. Wood floors, glass walls, a panoramic view of Lagos skyline. It didn't look like an office. It looked like a throne room. She stood by the window with a laptop speaking softly into a headset.
She motioned for him to sit. He didn't. She ended the call, turned. And for the first time, she looked different. Not in clothes, but in posture. Like someone who had been carrying something alone for too long. Then she showed him the plans. Blueprints, drawings, licensing.
Documents, photos, a new venture, an academy for street mechanics, vocational training, certification, partnership with international bodies, location, Ajegunle, AGG, Bariga. She had already purchased land, already secured permits. She wanted him to run it. He blinked slowly. Her words didn't land like blessings. They landed like thunder. She wasn't just giving him tools anymore. She was handing him a legacy. He didn't speak, just stared at the floor as if it would answer for him. She continued, told him how her father once sold car parts in Mushin. How she grew up smelling grease before she ever learned how to spell rolls-royce. How her mother died when she was 12, and how a mechanic once carried her to a hospital in his arms when no one else would stop their car. That man never gave his name. But she remembered the oil on his fingers, the smell of petrol on his shirt, the strength in his arms. She said she built her empire with those memories, but now she wanted to build something for them, for men like him, for boys like his son, for people who fix what the world breaks. She wasn't asking for thanks. She was inviting him in, to build it with her. That night, he sat with his son in their small apartment, watching cartoons flicker on a tiny TV someone had gifted them. But his mind wasn't there. It was in the classrooms that hadn't been built, in the hands of young men holding their first real tools, in the smile of a woman who had given him everything without once asking for anything back. He had always thought his story ended under a flyover. Now he realized that was where it started. The crowd was larger than expected. Cameras clicked like rainfall. Journalists adjusted microphones. Banners waved gently in the Lagos breeze, bearing the words, "Official. Launch. Urban Auto Skill Academy. Powered by Roy Lux Foundation." He stood behind the podium in a fresh caftan, pressed, white, simple, watching as young men in matching overalls filed into the compound. They came from streets he once called home, boys with hardened eyes, cracked heels, and knuckles that had only ever known hustle. For many, this was their first time inside a gated facility, not run by police. She stood beside him, dressed in Ankara with gold trimmings, her poise as calm as the sea. She didn't need to speak. Her presence alone told the story. A billionaire, with no need for credit, building with her heart, not just her purse. When he finally addressed the crowd, his voice didn't shake. It rang with quiet authority. Not of a man who conquered the world, but of one who had walked through fire and emerged holding the blueprint for others. He spoke of second chances, of roads that don't come with signs, of the dignity and labor, of how a single moment on a chaotic Lagos street gave birth to this very building. The audience clapped, some rising to their feet. She watched him with pride, not because he was perfect, but because he never folded. After the ribbon was cut, the students flooded into the rooms. Brightly lit halls with brand new machines, labeled tools and teaching stations. It looked nothing like a typical mechanic workshop. It looked like a university of survival, of skill, of transformation. Each room bore a name, but one room, at the heart of the compound, had a brass plate mounted on the wall. The Oberland room, in honor of the street that started it all. He stared at it for a long time. Memories flooded in. The sound of buses grinding over broken tar. The warmth of his son's hand wrapped around his. The cold nights. The unpaid jobs. The sting of hunger. The soft refusal to take money from a stranger in a Rolls-Royce. That stranger was now standing at the edge of the doorway, her eyes scanning the room not for flaws, but for fulfillment. And still, she had never asked for thanks. But she would get it. In bricks, in hands trained, in families fed, in boys turned into men with purpose. A week later, he moved into a new apartment provided by the foundation, not out of pity, but as part of the job. The unit had 2 bedrooms, tiled floors, running water, and a small balcony. He planted okra in a paint bucket near the railing. His son started speaking fluent English. At school, no longer hiding behind his father's legs when visitors came. He told classmates, "My daddy has a workshop, and it's very big." Every morning they walked together to the academy, hand in hand. Every evening they returned laughing. On the academy wall, a new mural was painted. It showed a man holding a toolbox standing beside a little boy, while a Rolls-Royce gleamed in the background, its bonnet raised, steam rising. A woman stood beside it, one hand outstretched, offering opportunity. It wasn't signed, but everyone knew the story. Not because it was on billboards, but because real stories don't need advertising. They echo through the lives they've touched. Hugh never forgot where he came from. Even as more centers opened in Oshodi, then Ibadan, then Abuja, he continued mentoring, teaching, fixing, not just cars, but boys who had been told they would never amount to anything, and every once in a while, when a Rolls-Royce drove past on the highway, he would glance at it, not with Envy, but with reverence. Because one day, long ago, that same car broke down in front of the only man who still remembered how to make broken things move again. And now, he was building a world where broken things no longer stayed broken.